but it is time to move on. We're going to spend a good bit of time this week really diving deep and going into these players and these names. Pat, talk to us about TPC Harding Park and what you think it's going to take to play well. And I'm going to chime in with maybe anything you may have missed and what I think is going to take to play well. We'll see if they line up. How about that?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, in here, we're playing basically a course that we don't see a whole lot, so I'm going to dive into it a little more than I might normally do. But, yes, we are at TPC Harding Park in San Francisco, California. It is a public course just along the beautiful Lake Merced and just inland from the Pacific coast. It is a par 70. It is playing 7,234 yards, but it can play as much as 7,400 yards depending on where they put the tee boxes on each day. You got bent grass greens. They probably got a little Poe in there as they've been they were planted back in 2014, and that's sort of a prevalent grass, but I think they're going to putt like bent. We'll see maybe later in the week if we get some caddy information in the Nut Hut. They're fairly large by tour standards as far as the greens are concerned. There's not a lot of slope, but I bet they're going to be running extremely quick. I think the PGA is going to get them as fast as they possibly can, especially since they don't have a lot of slope. We got a 156-player field this week. Top 70 in ties make the cut. Top 70,
Big deal.
Is not what we've seen. The PGA has said, we're screw the PGA Tour. We're going top 70.
Yeah.
You got 95 of the top 100 players in the world scheduled to tee it up here at Harding Park, so it is a definite stacked field. 7 par 4s longer than 460 yards. I think that's important to look at. We looked at that last week. We had the same thing. 8 holes on that par 70 were playing between 450 to 500 yards. You also got 2 potentially drivable par 4s in 7 and 16. So some of your more aggressive players might be able to drive those greens, especially like Bryson, who's just been bombing off the tee and is as aggressive as ever.
I don't think one of them's all that drivable when you look at it. I don't think it will. I can't remember which one, if it's either 7 or 16. There's one of them that there's just too much trouble right there. I don't see him trying it, but, definitely could go super deep down there and have a little, half pitch shot in. But, yeah, shorter par 4s, very scoreable.
Both par 5s are over 560 yards, so you'll see some of the longer guys be able to hit those into other than the rough, which I think is going to be very penal. You got dense sort of cypress trees, along the fairways. There's not a whole lot of trouble, though, off the tee, really, other than the rough and the bunkers. They've got these bunkers pretty strategically placed where, these guys are going to have to take them into account. They're not just going to always be able to just bomb them over them. So I think that's important. The rough, by the way, is Kentucky bluegrass with some rye. What else do I got here? I think that these guys are really just going to have to be very strategic off the tee. You can't just cowboy it up around this place. I mean, you can't just say, I'm going to have one strategy and I'm bomb it and do whatever. I just don't think you can do that here. You got to be pretty accurate. The fairways are pretty narrow, so I think that is important. If I could choose a golfer that was like the perfect golfer for this course, it would be, hey, you can hit it very long and you hit it very straight. Now, that combination doesn't always come together, but if that's what I was going to do, that's what I would look for. But all said and done, I think it's going to be a very tough track. I think scoring is going to be tough to come by. Weather looks pretty perfect, definitely going to be cooler than what they've seen the last few weeks, especially in Memphis. You look at where, maybe some, the times they have played this course in the past. We saw them play the 2015 WGC match play here where Rory won. We saw the 2009 President's Cup was played at Harding Park. Tiger had the most points, by the way, that week. And then 2005, the WGC American Express. Tiger also won here on this course in that tournament. Past champions, we had Brooks winning 2 years in a row in 19 and 18. We had JT in 2017, Jimmy Walker in 16, and Jason Day in 2015. Real quick, just to talk, some of the stats I looked at. I definitely looked at driving accuracy. I do think distance matters. I looked at, your good ball strikers. And again, like last week, that par 4 scoring stat between 450 and 500 yards, I think that might be just sort of an outlier to look at as well. So there you go. I'm almost out of breath, DB.
Very
and
nice.
I would say this. I'll add this. With the weather conditions there, it is nice and the weather's supposed to be good, but if you get some dense fog that tends to come in there, that can weigh down the ball a little bit. So that might hurt some of these guys that have a little bit more distance, just depending on what it's like day to day. I don't know how much you factor that in without knowing too much until Wednesday.
Yeah, I don't
But
think
it
you
is
do.
something to look out for. The ball does not travel as far if we get those kind of conditions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to travel that far either. Anyway, I mean, you're at sea level, so the ball's not going to go as far. I'm not sure you mentioned this, but this was previously hosted 2 WGC events, 2005 and 2015, as well as a President's Cup in 2009. So there is some
I
player
already
comment.
mentioned that.
Oh, good. Okay.
I just
There's
went
some
through all of
player
that.
there's some player commentary out there that talks about, how this course kind of played, how the ball doesn't fly here, and how it can play lengthy, and they've lengthened it since then. So, one of those par fives is reachable. The other one, maybe Bryson will get to, or if they really move up the tee boxes one day, they can get to it. But one of them's like over 600 yards. And you mentioned those long par fours. I think that's key. It's been very documented already that they've really narrowed in and squeezed in these fairways. I want to say I saw something, the average fairway width out here at Harding Park was around 22 to 23 yards, which is very narrow. Your average tour event's like 30. So it's definitely getting tighter off the tee this week. I kind of think when you look at the layout of this course, there's, like you mentioned, there's not a lot of water. There's not a whole lot of trouble. I mean, there's sand traps. There's rough, which everybody's talking about could be gnarly, which we'll definitely hear a lot more about. We've got probably, more than a half a dozen caddies who are arriving right now as we speak. We just got a photo from one getting off the plane. So we've got a half a dozen caddies or so arriving, a bunch of players that we can talk to. We'll know a lot more come Wednesday night for the Nut Hut members. We'll have a lot more information there. But other than the rough, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of stuff here. And you can really, really miss it well left or right and be in an opposite fairway and just hit it over the cypress trees. This is a municipal golf course. This is a TPC track, which normally plays easier. The layout is normally easier by nature, just being TPC and being a muni. The only way they can make it defensible is doing what they've done by tightening the fairways, lengthening the rough. You mentioned the greens are pretty big. They're not that, they're not small greens, so they're easier to hit. They're not super fast, and there's not a ton of undulation because it's primarily bent grass, and you just can't have all that undulation unless you're Augusta National and you tear them up every summer. So, I do think that there are going to be some players, and I think Bryson's one of them, who are going to try and overpower the golf course because I think he could just on a number of holes blow driver, and if he's in the rough, he'd rather have a wedge out of the rough than a 6-iron out of the fairway, or if he really loses it, he can hit it in the other fairway, and just hit out of that. Seriously, I looked at this.
That's a strategy we don't hear too much on the show. Well, if he really loses it, he's just going to be able to hit it from the other fairway.
Listen, this is how DB plays golf, man. Like if I, for example, there's a hole here, there's a course here locally that I always play really well because I can play from the opposite fairways, and so you can have that miss. You can aim it. Hell, a lot of times I'll aim at the tree line, and I likely ain't going to hit it straight. So if I hit it left, I'm in my fairway, and if I hit it right, I'm in the other fairway. So I don't know.
Well,
I'm not saying...
the only thing is I think these, from what I've read, and here and again we haven't seen this course all that much, is these cypress trees that are along the fairways can like gobble balls up. Like they're very.
Do you see how high Bryson's hitting the golf ball right now?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean for Bryson maybe, but.
Yeah, I mean, I said there's a handful. I think there's a handful of guys who are going to try and maybe overpower it more than some. Regardless of all of that, at the end of the day, length matters here. It is going to matter. I don't want a ton of short players. If I'm going to play a short player, I want him to be in excellent form coming in. I don't want him trying to knock the rust off. I want good form, a good price, and a good pedigree in majors and tough tournaments. I just don't. I think considering you're at sea level, you talked about the fact that the air can just be heavier here. The ball's not going to travel. They're going to have longer irons into these greens. And also, too, you could argue with the fairways being, shrinking in like that. I mean, even the short knockers aren't going to always be in the fairway. So if a lot more people are going to be in the rough, I'd rather the longer players be hitting out of the rough than the shorter players be hitting out of the rough.
Yeah, I agree there. And I'll add this. I mean, just as kind of another little, and I know you hate this, but you just mentioned that, you're going to have some longer iron shots into these greens. I think if you are looking at, where I'm going with this.
Yes, I
think if you're trying to look at players and maybe you just want to decide between a few, I don't mind looking at proximity 175 to 200 yards out. I just don't. Large greens, you're going to have to, look. I just think it's something to pay attention to. You might hear me mention it a few times. Fair warning.
I didn't mean to say this. This is unrelated. With the WGC match play event, I just don't think it's worth looking back at that. I mean, there's guys that I guess you could say, oh, they played here in a competitive event before. But when you're playing match play, the way that you attack the golf course is so much different. Like, I would say these players are more focused on competing against the other player more so than they are the golf course. Whereas this week, they're going to be thinking about beating the golf course. They're going to play the golf course, right? Whereas in match play, it's just a totally different approach. I only
mentioned that as just saying that that was another time they played this course. I wasn't saying that I'm looking at it as some sort
I know
of
that. But other people will be contacting us going, well, what about so-and-so who made it to the semifinals or what? I just don't think that's as relevant. I think that's too much noise. All right, so in terms of stats for me, I'm looking at strokes gained off the tee, which obviously takes into account distance and accuracy. Strokes gained approach, obviously. I think Data Golf showed that distance and strokes gained approach were the two biggest indicators on this golf course. So you got to hit your irons well into these greens for sure. I think par 4 scoring, as you mentioned, par 70. Ownership in terms of DFS is going to matter. And, you mentioned it, top 70 in ties. That means that worst case scenario, 156 players in this field, okay? If exactly 70 tie, then worst case scenario, 61% of this field is going to make the cut. It's probably going to be more than that. You can go ahead and eliminate about 40 players.
The PGA professionals.
And I kind of went through the field and eliminated more than just them. I did eliminate the PGA professionals, but I also eliminated a handful of other names that I just don't think have a chance to make the cut. So I came up with a number of 115 players that I think could have a chance to make the cut. 115. So now you've taken this field from 156 to 115, and you're going to get top 70 in ties. You're going to make the cut. You're going to have in DFS, you're going to have a lot of 6-6 lineups this week. This is not going to be like the carnage we've seen in weeks past since the restart. There's going to be a higher percentage of 6-6. That's very, very critical. A lot like last week with the WGC in terms of ownership, though, because you've got so many huge names and big names and it's such a deep field, I do think ownership will be diluted and spread out as we saw at the WGC. You're not going to have anybody that's like 25, 30% owned. Like we normally see. So in terms of DFS, I think you can, pay attention to ownership, make sure that your lineup does have a couple of guys, 2 or 3 that give you a significant amount of leverage, especially if you're playing in some of these big contests that are offered over on Draftkings. You need leverage, but I'm just saying if you're going to eat the chalk this week, I'm doing air quotes, if you're going to eat the chalk in DFS, what that means is you're really eating like 20% guys or 22% guys or 23% guys or 18% guys, which isn't super, super chalky, right? Like we definitely see it a lot higher than that. But make sure you got some guys on your roster that are 5%, 6%, 4%. Make sure you got some of that in there too so that you can differentiate your lineups. And then in terms of, I think another important thing is when you look back at PGA Championships over the years, incoming form has definitely been an indicator, and a lot of times it can be for majors, but having guys who have played recently and played very well, I think the stat is like top 30s. There's only been like 2 players that haven't had a top 30 finish in the previous start since like 2000. And then also only like 2 or 3 players in the last since 2000 that have not had a win in that season or that calendar year. So obviously this season's been weird with COVID, but I think form is very, very critical here. I'm not going to be jumping on guys that just, and I think I'm going to get cute with them and surprise everyone. I don't think that matters. Like, let's not get too cute with that. Let's get guys who are in form and can show up and play. How's that sound? We ready?
Sounds good. Yeah. I'm ready.
All of our data, all of our stats are coming to you courtesy Fantasy National. That is where we go. That's where we've gone for going on 4 years now for all of our golf stats, because the PGA Tour website sucks for golf stats. If you want great golf stats and golf stats only, fantasynational.com/TJ, or you can use promo code Tour Junkies when you check out, is the way to go. They offer subscriptions weekly, monthly, or annually. If you want to join, you can even join this week to try it out. And if you go, man, this is awesome, then you can sign up for a month or a year, and you still get the 20% off discount because the Tour Junkies sent you. They have lineup optimizers for DFS, ownership projections for DFS. But, yeah, you can dig into all the players, all the stats you could think of, even proprietary stats that only Fantasy National has. Again, we've been using them for 3.5 years. They are the best. Check them out, fantasynational.com/TJ. So when you hear us reference where these guys stand in a certain stat category or recent form or whatever, we pull all of that from Fantasy National. We only have to go to one place, which is fantastic. For course history, for recent form, for stats, it all goes to fantasynational.com/TJ. So there we go.